Another says that she once healed a friend with a broken ankle by putting her hands on it. And then there's Jordan, who's been going to Yorniwana since he was like 4. When I met him, he looked me up and down and then stared at the middle of my forehead. When I asked him if everything was okay, he smirked and said, "I guess you'll find out soon." Then the second night, he announced during prayer time that he could sense dark, evil forces attacking the camp, and that we have to be strong because Satan has us in his sight. So, yeah, it's a Christian camp, all right, but I've been making do as best as I can. I signed up to instruct the camp's rock climbing and high ropes course, and I'm glad I did. They have a 50-foot rock wall that is a serious challenge to climb, and walking on a tightrope 30 feet above the ground, with only a flimsy rope to support me, is pretty fun. I also made friends with the less fundamentalist counselors, some of whom will even have the occasional drink or even a hit of a bong if they're feeling really adventurous. Safe to say my side hustle wouldn't do so well in these parts. Among the friends I made was Kate. She was in my rocks ropes group, though I can't say I paid her much attention for the first few days. On Tuesday, though, she sat next to me at the evening church service, and as Smokey, the camp's director, was 30 minutes into his rant on the evils of homosexuality, she leaned over and whispered, "Seems a bit hypocritical, given the massive stick he has up his ass." It took all my might to not break into hysterics. The next day, we were inseparable. We made jokes while climbing. We kept rolling our eyes at each other whenever Smokey went off on a rant on the state of our culture, and we sat nice and close during meals and the nightly campfire. I have no idea why she didn't catch my eye earlier. She had cute little face, wavy brown hair that looks perfect even in the middle of the woods, and a body that's fine even in the mandatory one-piece swimsuits all the girls have to wear. Wednesday evening, after we parted ways following the church service, I went back to my Tabin with a new spring in my step. Maybe I could actually make a move on Kate. She seemed cool enough to flaunt the rules. And even if she wasn't, at least I had someone fun to hang out with for the rest of the summer. As I fell asleep, I remember thinking that this summer might actually be pretty good for me. And that's when things started to get weird. I sometimes suffer from what I can only describe as waking nightmares. There's a specific medical term for it, but I'm in the middle of nowhere with no internet access, so whatever. I'll wake up and see and hear things that aren't there. Often it will be someone in bed next to me, or spiders all over the walls, or ghosts flying through my room. It's really freaky, and it's caused more than a few issues with my roommates back at school, but I've learned to live with it. One of the things I liked about her was that she didn't seem to subscribe to all the crazier aspects of the camp's religious beliefs. Her reaction to my dream said otherwise. It was close to midnight, and I was wide awake. I knew I had to talk to her. I quietly climbed out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and put on my darkest clothes. Then I headed out towards her cabin, moving through the black forest path as deftly as I could, and listening for any sounds of other people. I knew I'd be in a lot of trouble if I was caught out here. The path led out of the forest and then sloped down to the girls' cabins below. I stopped at the top of the hill and looked at them, focusing on hers. It occurred to me that I didn't actually have a plan from here. Kate shared her cabin with a few other counselors, just like I did, and I didn't know which bunk was hers. What was I expecting to do? Wake her up and ask her to talk to me? There was a 99% chance that would end with shouting, a few punches, and me being sent home. As I stared at Kate's cabin from the hill, movement beyond it caught my eye. Someone was running through the soccer fields to the north, heading towards the cabins. I could barely make out the person, but I could see their flashlights swinging in their arms as they ran. They were moving at breakneck speed. Maybe someone realizing they'd gone way past curfew? The person got closer, and in the faint moonlight I could make out their hot pink t-shirt and the long hair flowing behind them. Oh God. Kate. What was she doing? Kate reached the circle of cabins, but instead of going in, she cut around them and then started running away towards another section of the forest to the west. I wanted to call after her, but I knew it would wake up at least a few people. I wanted to chase after her, though I already knew I wouldn't be able to catch her. She was a veteran of this place, and I could barely navigate the forest in broad daylight. Still, I had to try. I took a step and was about to break off into a sprint when I saw it. Or, I think I saw it. It was another figure, moving through the soccer fields towards the cabins. This one was all black, and I had to squint because I honestly don't know if I was truly seeing it, or if my mind and eyes were playing tricks on me. The figure, as I saw it, followed Kate's path around the cabins and into the trees to the west, where it promptly disappeared from sight. What on earth? I found myself falling down onto the cool grass, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. For a minute, I wondered if I was currently dreaming up this surreal scene. Why was Kate running? Where was she going? And did I see something chase her? An ear-piercing scream from the woods broke me out of my daze. I jumped up and was once again about to start running for the forest when several lights in the cabins came on. Shit. They couldn't see me. I spun around and ran back through the woods and into my cabin. I got back in my sleeping bag and eventually fell asleep. That was last night. This morning, Kate wasn't at breakfast, and when I asked the head staff where she was, I was told that she wasn't well and had gone home. Her bunkmates and our fellow ropes instructors didn't have anything to add beyond that. It seems like everyone I've spoken to has repeated the line of Kate being not well, and then telling me not to worry about it when I pressed on what was wrong. So that's where things are now. The campers arrive tomorrow for the first weekly session of the summer. I'm excited to meet the boys in my cabin, and when I get the chance, I'm going to explore the forest to the west of the girls' cabins and see if I can find anything about Kate's disappearance. I'll update you again next week when I'm back in town and have cell reception. I'll say this, though. I'm unsure about God, and I don't really believe in demons, but like I said, there's something weird going on here at Camp Yorniwana. Let me start with the good news. My campers this week were awesome. I had a tabin of 6 12-year-old boys, and though I was initially nervous about it, this being my first time as a counselor ever, it turns out kids these days are actually really freaking cool. Yes, they talked about video games all the time, and I don't think more than 30 minutes ever went by without someone flossing or dabbing. I really thought both of those things were over, but beyond that, I was amazed at how insightful my campers were. Every night I was supposed to do a Bible study with them, where we'd read from the good book and discuss how it pertained to our lives. But since my knowledge of the Bible is a bit rusty, for example, I didn't know it was broken down beyond Old and New Testament. I just opened up the floor to discuss what mattered to them in their lives. And their responses blew my mind. All of them were super concerned about the planet and what they could do to save it. One kid knew the price of Telsa's stock. WTF. A few of them said they were glad to be away from their phones for a week because of how often they felt they had to check them. And when I asked what their biggest fears were, I received a few standard answers: heights, spiders, until one boy said, having a video of me doing something embarrassing go viral. And they all agreed with that. Just wow. Rock climbing instruction went great too. All I had to do was get kids in a harness, belay them as they climbed, cheer them on if they got stuck, and lower them down when they reached the tops, were too scared to go higher. So yeah, on the counselor side of things, I crushed it this week. If Yorniwana paid its staff anything, I'd totally be in line for a bonus. On the non-counselor side of things, it's been a different story. On a Sunday, the day the campers arrived, I was still reeling from what I thought I saw with Kate, and despite the flat answers I'd been getting from the other staff, I was still asking as many people as I could what had happened to her. More than a few of them had barely any idea who I was referring to in the first place, but those who did kept repeating the line about her being not well. When I asked what on earth that even meant, I was stonewalled. Sunday night, as the worship band, a 5-piece rock band that plays Christian music, simultaneously awesome and lame, was singing about Romans 16-something, Jonathan pulled me aside. "You need to stop asking questions about Kate," he said. His tone was low and harsh, threatening almost. I was shocked. I'd known this guy for several years and had come up to camp at his invitation, and now he was telling me to stop looking into this hella mysterious disappearance. I started to object, but he cut me off. I'm serious. Don't look into this any further. His eyebrows went way up and he gave me a look, the kind you give when you're trying to tell someone to read between the lines. Just drop it. Then he smiled a tiny bit and went back into the lodge, where he joined in with his campers, jumping up and down to the music. I stayed outside for another few minutes, trying to figure out what had just happened. I hadn't even asked Jonathan about Kate, and yet he had known. Clearly, word was getting around. The last thing I wanted was to be making waves just a week into this 8-week stay. So I did, as my friend asked, and stopped directly asking questions. There were other ways I needed to investigate Kate's disappearance anyway. Ways that, hopefully, would not be as frustrating as asking questions of the tightest-lipped teenagers in the province. Tuesday morning, as all the cabins lined up for breakfast, I noticed a few groups of girls openly crying. Their counselors tried to calm them down, but they seemed just as distraught, with pale faces and wide, fearful eyes. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe someone had been hurt and had to go home, or a bad bout of homesickness had made its way into the cabins. That evening, after a lengthy campfire filled with admittedly hilarious skits and way too much singing, all the male staff were asked to stay behind as the campers went back to their cabins. Once we were alone, Donald, the male staff leader, stood up and asked us to gather in closely. In the fire's dying light, I could see the anger in his face. I know I have said this before, but it obviously needs repeating. You are not, absolutely not, allowed to pull pranks on the girls. That means the campers, the staff, and any of their property. I glanced around at the other counselors. If they were as confused as I was, they didn't show it. Donald continued, "Whoever vandalized the girls' cabins last night, I hope you know it wasn't funny at all." It terrified a whole bunch of campers, and now Smokey and Beth, the female staff leader, are going to have to explain it to their parents at the end of the week. I shouldn't even have to tell you the consequences for doing this. I expect better from all of you. He dismissed us. As we headed back to our cabins, I sidled up next to a group walking together and asked them if they knew what Donald had been talking about. Yeah, apparently, in the middle of the night last night, there were some weird screeching sounds around the girls' cabins, one of them said. And then this morning there were weird claw marks burnt into the wood. Shoot, I said. And Donald thinks one of us did it? He's wrong too. It was Jordan. Loud screeches and burnt claw marks in the middle of the night aren't a prank. It's signs that this spiritual warfare is entering our physical world. There was a mixed reaction from the other boys. We all need to go back to our cabins and pray for this camp and these campers. The enemy wants us to be scared so that these kids won't hear about Jesus' love for them. I wanted to suggest that maybe mentioning Satan and spiritual warfare was causing this fear, but I bit my tongue. I went back to my cabin, got my campers into bed, and then started a conversation about family that eventually devolved into a discussion of their favorite TikTok videos. So it goes. The next day, after a morning of unsuccessfully trying to get just one camper to climb an overhang, I found myself with a few hours off, as the rest of camp had a massive game of capture the flag, real-life Overwatch, as one genius counselor called it. After resting in my bunk for half an hour, eating a few Mars bars from the tuck shop, and writing the 1,200 words you've read so far, I decided it was time to further my investigation. I headed to the girls' cabins, following the same path I had on Friday night when I'd gone to talk to Kate. It was much easier to navigate the forest in the daylight, and when I wasn't worried about being seen, but when I left the tree cover and saw the cabins from the top of the hill, I froze up. I'd been in that very spot when I'd seen Kate running from something. I think. I sighed. I should have chased after her, or at the very least, called after her. I'd been a coward and allowed my fear of being caught breaking these stupid religious rules to make my decision. Damn it. No. There was no time for regrets. I shook the memories away and walked down the path and into the center of the dozen or so tabins. It didn't take much time to find the claw marks the guy had mentioned, though to call them claws was a bit of an understatement. These were like a bird's talons, but much bigger. Each of the 4 appendages burned into the wood was a good 6 inches long. I rubbed my thumbnail along the mark, but nothing came off. This wasn't some impressive paint job. These things were burnt on. A quick search showed that 3 of the cabins had been hit with this mark, all of them to the right of the doorframe. One of the cabins had been the one Kate stayed in. Was that a coincidence? It had to be. I mean, this had to just be a sick prank, right? As I stared at the charred symbol, one of the cabin's front flaps opened, and a sleepy-looking girl stared out at me. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a hoarse voice. Sorry," I said. "I had to drop off a rock climbing harness." Not a bad lie. She gave me a look and then went back into her cabin. I took that as a sign to get out, but I still had more investigating to do. I left the girls' cabins and headed west, into the forest, following the same route I'd seen Kate take on the Friday night. There was only one path through the trees, and a narrow and overgrown one at that. I quickly found myself surrounded by green, leafy brush, unable to see more than 5 feet in front of me. I tried to do the math in my head. I'd seen Kate go into the forest, and then heard her scream, 30 seconds later? And in the darkness of the night, with just a flashlight to guide her, she could probably take 2 steps a second, even if she were moving as fast as she could. If she had in fact been running from something I think I saw. I counted out 60 steps and stopped. My view hadn't changed, just branches and leaves. I crouched down and looked for footprints, though the ground was dry and hard and didn't show me anything. I raised my own foot and stomped it down to see if it would make an indent. Nothing. I would not be a very good man-tracker. I was about to stand back up when I spotted a blotch of red on a rock in front of me. It didn't take me long to realize what it was. I grabbed a twig and rubbed it. It scraped off easily. This blood was fresh. My heart simultaneously leapt and deflated. I finally had a clue, but the worst kind. I stood back up and looked around for more. It wasn't hard to find. There were little specks and splotches on the ground and streaked along some larger leaves. I followed it further down the path, where the blood marks became larger and more noticeable. I'm normally not able to handle the sight of blood in the best of circumstances. Here, my stomach felt like it could explode at any second. I was so preoccupied with finding the blood that I didn't notice the path's ending until I was suddenly out of the surrounding trees and in a small clearing of about half an acre, with what looked like a large junk heap in the center. The sunlight once again hit my face, and I took a second to calm myself and take a few deep breaths. Then I walked up to the thing in the middle. It wasn't a junk heap. It was the remains of a building that looked like it had burned down long ago. Parts of a metal frame, now charred and bent in all sorts of directions, stood in the ground, with chunks of wood and stone still clinging to a few pieces. I slowly walked around it, looking for any further sights of blood. There was nothing among the ash and soot that lay heavily on the ground, nor the pieces of rubble scattered through the wreckage. There was, however, a smell that I recognized but couldn't place. It seemed to permeate all through the clearing, and it got stronger as I approached the building's remains. I couldn't actually step into the rubble. The collapsed wood, stone, and metal would undoubtedly leave me with some nasty cuts along my legs if I tried to. But I looked at it with awe and more than a little fear. What was this place? I'd never heard of it during our training, and none of the counselors or campers had mentioned it. Seemed strange to have the ruins of this structure in the middle of the forest and not tell anyone about it. I spent another 5 minutes looking around, but I couldn't find any more blood, be it in the clearing or on the surrounding trees. There was only one other path I could find, this one just as narrow and branch-ridden as the one I'd came in on. I followed it. It ended close to the camp's lodge, though as I stepped out and looked back, it was almost impossible to see it again. That night, over dinner of chicken and bacon wraps, have I mentioned that the food at Yorniwana is amazing? I told my campers about my discovery earlier that day. They were quick to fill me in on it. "It's the burnt place," one of them said. "It used to be used for teaching about nature and survival and things, but it burned down like 5 years ago." 2 years ago, another one corrected. "I remember because I was at camp when it happened." "No, you weren't," said a third boy. It burned down in the spring when it was hit by lightning. I held up my hands to keep an argument from breaking out. So you all know of it? A bunch of head nods. But we're not allowed to go near it. They used to make such a big deal of staying away. Apparently some kid went to it and got trapped and they had to cut his leg off. Oh, come on, that never happened. More arguing. I went back to my rap. This place had a name and a lore as well. The rest of my week was uneventful, though I have to admit it was hard to say goodbye to my campers this morning. They all gave me such big hugs before they went home, and now I have to get ready for a whole new batch tomorrow. I also need to figure out my next step for Kate. The fact that her blood led me to the burnt place has to mean something, right? Wish me luck. I'll write again next week. Oh, and one more thing. As I was walking through town, trying to find a decent data connection, I saw a landscaping company lugging around big bags of fertilizer on a lawn, and I finally recognized the scent that had been at the burnt place. How could I not? It had been burned into my nostrils in grade 11 chemistry. Sulfur. Sunday night, after the campers had arrived and done their swim tests in the still freezing cold lake, and after we'd finished dinner and sung a few songs, Donald and Beth stood up in front of everyone to welcome them to week 2 of Yorniwana's 2019 summer. It was similar to the speech they'd given the week before. Basic explanation of the camp's facilities, how to sign up for the different instructions, and rules for staying safe throughout the week. At the end, Donald added one more thing that he hadn't mentioned the previous week. There are a lot of fun things to do up here, he said. But there are also areas that aren't safe. That includes the woods. You're allowed to go the forest path leading to the girls' tabins. If you are a girl, of course. That produced a few laughs. But all other parts of the forest are, shall we say, forbidden. His voice went comically high. More laughs. I felt a shiver go down my spine. That night, as I got to know the new group of boys in my tabin, my questions about their families and what they liked to do for fun gradually shifted into talking about Yorniwana itself. All but one of them had been going to this camp for years, and the one who was new was asking all kinds of questions, ones that I really should have asked, to be honest. Best places to watch the sunset, best time to take a shower without waiting for a lineup, what to talk about when around girls, etc. Then he asked about the forest and why it was off limits. Oh, that's because of the burnt place, one of the other campers said. The camp legally can't allow anyone to go near it. Yeah, said another. I heard that the reason it burned down was because people were doing a satanic ritual, and now it's a portal to hell. This elicited a chorus of gasps. A third added, I heard that a few years ago. A camper went there late at night, and he just disappeared. No, that didn't happen. I was surprised by the loudness of my voice. They all looked at me. I smiled. I mean, guys, come on. This camp is totally safe, and the burnt place happened by accident. Now why don't we, pray, and then we can go to bed. I prayed, asking for a great week and that God, or whoever was listening, would keep us all safe, and then shut off the lights. Sleep didn't come for a while. I kept thinking about the burnt place and the rumors surrounding it. Had a camper actually disappeared at it? No, of course not. It wasn't possible. Yorniwana would have been shut down. It would have been all over the news. But what about Kate? Why had her last known place to me been the burnt place? What had happened to her? The next 2 days went on fine, teaching rock climbing in the mornings, doing games and activities in the afternoon, and then worship songs and skits in the evening. My campers were well behaved and didn't seem to notice the occasional time I'd zone out, wondering about Kate and the burnt place. One of them claimed to be dating one of the girl campers, so that held their attention for most of the day. Tuesday night, I woke up around 3 a.m. The cloaked figure was back. He, again, stood at the entrance to the tabin, just feet away from where I was laying. He seemed even taller this time, his robes even longer and darker. His hooded face slowly moved around the room, feet away from us, but I wasn't going to check. I cut behind the lodge, looking for the entrance to the path. It took me a few seconds, but I was able to find it. I pushed the branches aside and sprinted through it as quickly as I could, dodging roots, rocks, and branches. I could hear Kyle behind me, or more, I could hear multiple twigs and limbs breaking behind me. I turned another winding corner, and at the last second saw the small boy sitting on the ground. I jumped up and over him, but my foot caught a root as I landed, and I spilled onto the dirt. I swore twice before remembering who I was next to. Turning myself around and sitting up, I looked at the boy I'd nearly ploughed into. He was looking at me, with big, watery eyes and tears-strewn cheeks. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, like I was talking to a wounded animal. "Are you okay?" His head shook a tiny bit before bowing back down into his hands. I heard more breaking sticks come from around the bend as Kyle jogged up to us, his blonde hair covered in twigs and buds. He looked relieved as he saw the boy, but it was short-lived. "What happened?" he asked. I shrugged. Kyle crouched down next to the camper. "Hey, Nathan, what are you doing here?" Nathan again said nothing, but I could hear his sobs coming from behind his hands. I stood back up and dusted myself off. As I checked for any scrapes or blood, I caught that familiar scent again, sulfur. I saw Kyle's nostrils flare before he looked up at me, his eyes wide. I motioned my head back to the main camp. We had to get out of here. Kyle reached down to help Nathan up, but the boy pulled away. "Nate, we have to get going," Kyle said, his voice cracking hard. It's lunchtime. We can't be late for that, right?" A twig cracked behind me. We both jumped right up. I looked around but didn't see any movement. The wind? An animal? I really didn't want to find out. "Nathan, we have to go," I said, trying to hide the fear in my own voice. "Everyone is going to wonder where you are." His sobbing just got louder. "Fine then." I reached down, lifted him up, and started carrying him back down the path. He screamed and flailed around, but I was able to hold his feet to keep him from kicking me. Kyle walked ahead of us, pushing away the tree branches as best as he could. The scent of sulfur gradually faded away, and once we emerged from path, all I could smell was the grilled cheese in the mess hall. I put Nathan down. He immediately collapsed back onto the ground, still crying uncontrollably. Kyle again asked him what had happened, but the boy said nothing. Kyle looked back at me, his own eyes now beginning to tear up. Poor guy. This is probably not what he had expected counseling to be like. "Hey!" From around the lodge, in a near sprint, came Donald. "Oh, thank God, there you guys are." He stopped and looked down at Nathan, then at us, as if asking for an explanation. I quickly filled him in on where we had found him. I didn't mention the sulfur, or why Nathan would have been on the path in the first place. Donald nodded, and then crouched down. "Hey, Nate," he said softly. "Could you look up at me for a second?" The boy's head left his hands and raised up towards the male staff leader. As they made contact, he shrunk back, but he didn't hide his face again. "I was wondering if you could help me. I have all these popsicles in my cabin, and I don't have enough room for all of them in my little freezer. Think you could come and have one or two before they melt?" A small smile cracked on the boy's face, and he nodded slightly. "Awesome," Donald said. He offered Nathan his hands and helped the boy up. He turned back to me and Kyle. "You guys go be with your cabins. I'll talk to you later." Still holding Nathan's hand, he walked off towards his cabin. Kyle and I headed to the mess hall, where there was fortunately enough food left to fill me up. My campers asked where I had been, and I just said it had taken me a long time to inspect all the ropes. I didn't see Nathan or Donald during the afternoon, but at dinner, the camper was back at his table, with Kyle and Donald was at the staff table. While dishes were being cleaned, I walked over to the leader and asked how Nathan was. "He's fine now," Donald said. Something clearly shook him up, but it's amazing what a bit of sugar can do to cheer up a kid. That's not the end of story. Wait for the next part. Until then, if you liked my video, then hit the like button and comment down your views. For more content like this, do subscribe my channel.